Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tamanka and Ting for the second episode, the only TNT you can ever visit for free with a simple like, share, and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you're following us to stay up to date with all of the upcoming episodes. I have some really cool episodes planned for the next couple of weeks, and you don't want to miss it. Um, Happy Valentine's Day, because by the time you're seeing this, it's definitely going to be Valentine's Day. As you can see, I am here on the podcast. The only love I'm concerned with is the Love of Carnival. So we're gonna jump right into it. By now, Trinidad Carnival is over, and I must say, even though this is gonna be a shorter episode, the Trinidad Carnival experience, even though I am not there this year, has been so hilarious to me. Like, it's just so funny as somebody who's not participating this year to sit back and watch other people participate for the first time, or, just go to have a good time, even if it's not their first time. And it's just been so entertaining to watch everyone. I've been thoroughly entertained as somebody who did not go. So I hope you guys who went and, were like in the melee and all of that stuff had a great time, especially for the type of money that you spent. And that brings us to our first topic. This is again going to be a shorter episode because I have longer episodes planned for the podcast. But those will be with guests, and we will be on in person on a new set because I am tired of this setup. I want something really stable, but that's neither here nor there. But back to carnival expenses. So I don't know if everybody saw, but like earlier, before, all of the fetes and stuff started, the conversation of whether or not carnival is becoming too expensive, of course, came up again. And I think it's definitely a conversation that we should have. Like, carnival, we all know that carnival is going to be some level of an expense, right? And for most people, it is like their vacation. Like, they plan for this years, a year in advance or months in advance. They know it's the same time every year, depending upon, what carnival you frequent. Everybody knows that, you know, Trinidad Carnival is going to be right before Ash Wednesday. People, it's not a surprise to anyone. So people usually say, but I feel like we're approaching a point or a place where even saving is not going to do it. We Many people like to start with the conversation of the costumes, but even before you get to the costumes, especially what as it relates to Trinidad Carnival, I think it's always best to book your flight and accommodations first before you book your costume. Yes, I think that. Does that always happen for me? Absolutely not. So no judgment there. But I think the conversation definitely should start there when it comes to affordability, because even if you have a costume, if you can't get there and you don't have, even if you can get there, you don't have a place to stay, then what are you going to do, right? Um, Flights, I remember when I went last year, they there was really no way to avoid an expensive flight. Even if you try to book like two one ways, they're gonna catch you. Um, and even if you do a round trip, you're still it's already gonna be, you know, a $1,500 flight. And even if book months in advance, I know people like to book as soon as Carnival finishes the year before, you're still going to end up paying a good amount of money. It's, because the airlines know when Carnival is too, or because of like the spikes of travelers to these destinations around that time. So of course they're going to capitalize on that and, raise some prices. But now we're being priced out of even partaking, and that is something that we really need to discuss. Like, who do we need to talk to? How do we, make sure that this remains affordable for people to travel? Because it's not even just a conversation of, tourism. There are people who are, coming back to their country to have a good time, people who haven't been back in years, months, they want to come back and, participate in their culture. But if they can't do that, then what now? You know what I'm saying? And let's not even start about accommodations, regular Airbnbs that would cost, I don't know, $100 per day, $300 per day, or now like $800, $900 a day. And and to be honest, sometimes you'll pay that and still not even be close to the action. Or you'll find that there are Airbnb hosts who you'll book, you'll go through all of the, proper channels, you'll be solidified. And then like what happened to me last year, the Airbnb host will then, write to you and say, hey, actually, I have to cancel this accommodation or this reservation because we have construction going on, and I don't want to put you guys through that. Of course, me and my group were understanding. We're like, yeah, sure, of course, whatever. And then like a couple hours later, even a day later, I think we saw that the same Airbnb that we booked went back on the site for more money. So the person was trying to like gouge us or gouge somebody else, because she definitely told us like, yeah, if you got, and mind you, this was like 4 weeks before Carnival, 4 weeks before we're supposed to touch down. And 4 weeks before you're supposed to touch down in Trinidad, there's no, if you can find another Airbnb, and this was not for like a small group of, well, it was for a smaller group of people, but if it's not just for like you one or another person, it's usually really hard to find another Airbnb. So she told us that, if you still run into trouble trying to find another Airbnb, come back and let me know, and, I can see what I can do for you. Because she wanted us to pay the higher price, because when we found it, it was a much lower price, and we ourselves were also like really surprised and happy that we were able to catch it at such a low price, even though we booked very late in terms of, when people suggest to book. So it there's a lot of there are a lot of people looking out for themselves, as they should. Um, but there's also a lot of price gouging, a lot of price hiking. And then, of course, when you get to the conversation of costumes, I remember when the first time I'd ever entertained the idea of going to Trinidad Carnival was actually right before the world shut down back in 2020. And I remember um, I saw the costume that I want. That was the year when everybody had the dragons, and everything was so beautiful. And I saw that the back line for the section that I wanted started at like $800. I'm like, well, damn. If the back line is $800, how much is the front line? And of course, the front line was like a rent payment. Like it was like, at the time, it was like 1,500 USD, and that's literally, well, back then at that time, it was somebody's rent payment. Like it just didn't make much sense to me. But I miss it now, because costumes, if you want any type of good costume, the back line is now $900, because you got to account for inflation and all of those things. And it, like, again, people are being priced out of playing mass, and it really shouldn't ever have to come to that. Like, I understand, like I mentioned in episode 1, like I understand these are businesses, and these are business people. They have to see return on their investments so that they can do this again and again and again for the next years. But when do we say, okay, enough is enough? Like, yes, you need to make money, but this is also culture. And, if we can't, as Caribbean people, as West Indian people, participate in our own culture, if the people on these islands can't participate in their own culture, then, what have we really become? I remember the first time I ever heard about like a carnival loan, I was blown away, because I as somebody, who's done the higher education thing, like, the only time you really hear about loans outside of that context, it's like, a car loan or a loan for a home. And you're thinking about like bigger things that you'll have for extended period of time. So would it make sense to take out a loan and pay on it over time? But for Carnival, something that's at most, 2 days, like you're the actual like participating in carnival is 2 days, carnival Monday, carnival Tuesday, all of the fests and all that other stuff before, but that's not what you're taking the loan out for. It's really usually to pay for the costume, from my understanding. um that blew my mind, and there are people who actually do it, and I am glad that there is an avenue for people to still participate in carnival and stuff like that, but it get the question then becomes like, Lord, alone for carnival. I know if other people heard about it, it would blow their mind as well, but I'm glad there's still that avenue. But what about the people who can't, exercise that channel? What about the people who can't get the loan or are denied for whatever reason? And I don't know what the parameters are, as it relates to, the approval or denial process. Um, but yeah, me personally, I think a loan for carnival is a bit much. But then I guess, then again, one can just say it's like putting, your vacation or, your costume on your credit card. So it might not be that bad. It all comes down to what the interest rates are, of course, right? Um, but then in the same vein, in the conversation about, carnival or costumes being too expensive, many people then start to say, oh, we need to go back to making things locally. We need to stop outsourcing and all this other stuff. And while I understand, I really do understand, the thinking or the logic behind that. People will assume that if it's made locally, it will be a lot cheaper and all that other stuff, or made a lot better. I don't think that the execution of that, um, people are really ready for. Because let's be honest, people keep saying, "Oh yeah, we're losing." Doing so would help us, get back to culture, back to tradition, and all that other stuff. We're losing recipes, blah 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 blah. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Who is really going to sit in a mass camp after your 9 to 5 long day of work and glue some feathers and glue some gems, right? I I done it, and I understand why. That is the reason why I understand that it's good in theory. It's good to hear. It's good to say, but people are not really. When it comes down to the execution, you're not gonna find too many people who are going to want to do that. Like, it's not easy. Two, it takes a lot of like concentration. You have to pay attention to what you're doing. You have to make sure you glue the gems on correctly. There are certain ways to do certain things so that everything looks uniform. You can't just be gluing on feathers and gems, any which way. Because I mean, at the end of the day, they have to look a certain way. And of course, we're the first ones to complain about, the costume not looking like the prototype. So when you really sit down and think about it, for instance, let's say it's a Friday, right? You've been to work all day, all week. It's Friday. You're thinking about your bed. You're thinking about going out and having a drink with friends. But no, you can't go out and have a drink with friends. Carnival is coming. People have costumes that they need. You need to be in the mass camp. You need to be gemming and gluing and all. You're not gonna want to sit down there and do that. It's hot. Is you don't want nobody to tell you anything, anybody come and correct you. Oh, you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right. You get upset, you get frustrated because people have been fussing with you all day at work. You're not going to sit in a mass camp and gem and glue and put feathers on all of these costumes, make sure that everything is the way that it should be for the consumer, the person who purchased this costume, just to say, oh, tradition, or, this is going to drive down costs. The people that I normally see in a mass camp are usually children or young people. People who don't, they're either in school or coming after school, or who are just in the beginning of like their careers, their jobs probably are part-time jobs, or even elderly people or older people who are not working full-time, uh, who are, looking for something to do, something to keep them busy. those are the people that I usually see in a mass camp. Those are the people you usually see helping with distribution, not grown people who are, working 9 to 5, children, all this other stuff, deep in their careers. So I feel like we say that because we like to hear it. It sounds good, but how dedicated are we really to making sure that this comes to for fruition? Like, are we just saying that because it sounds good and we know other people will agree and blah 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 blah, or are we actually going to put in the elbow grease to make sure that it actually happens? Because I mean, with faith without works is futile, right? So if we're not willing to put in the work, then what? I don't think we have an answer for this question just yet, but hopefully it will actualize itself soon, because it's getting to be too much. And when you think about it even further, in terms of like bands and actually playing mass with things like VIP sections and experiences on the road, I personally don't have a problem with. I honestly really don't know how I feel about it, actually. I don't mind. People pay their money for what they want, right? I'll pay my money for what I want, for the type of experience that I want to have on the road, right? But I understand how this could be offensive to other people, especially traditionalists who want to see mass happen in a certain way. I feel like the two can coexist, but it has to happen in a certain way. Like, you if your VIP section starts to infringe on me having the best time of my life on the road, then we have a problem. I don't care how much money you paid. Move your VIP section, move your cart. The one thing that gets on my that I am not much of a fan of are people in them carts being pulled around and all. I think that's weird. To me, mass is, the drinks truck, the bathroom truck, the music trucks, all those little carts in the middle, like more things that I have to worry about on the road outside of the actual big trucks. Like, I'm not a fan of how they are done right now. I mean, when I was in Trinidad, and I've only really experienced it in Trinidad, or I've only seen it in Trinidad. It hasn't made its way to Antigua yet, and I hope it never does. Um, because I just don't think that it adds to an enjoyable experience. Because one, only a few people can fit on those little carts, right? And I feel like it promotes not taking a break, because when you're tired, okay, cool, you can get up in a cart, but when you're tired, you really should, one, go find the drinks truck so you can get yourself some water, rehydrate, make sure you're still doing okay after dancing and jumping up and down and doing all these things in the hot sun with a big backpack and all these other things on you. Or you should sit down, go use the bathroom, do something, instead of just putting yourself on something that can move you so that you can continue to go with the day. Next thing you know, people passing out, and now everything has to stop, call the ambulance and all this, or the medic's truck. I'm not a fan of like those VIP moving trucks things, and I feel like I'm not the only one, or I know that I'm not the only one. So we'll see how far they go. But I personally don't have a issue with people paying for like an upgraded experience, a VIP experience. That's their money. They can do whatever they need to do, just as long as their experience doesn't infringe on my experience. I think everything is cool and copacetic. I think the last thing that I want to talk about is actually really, it has a really funny message that I think transcends, carnival and all this other stuff, just personally as well. And it's about how comparison is the thief of joy. Like, we say it all the time, but do we really internalize what that means? Like, do we have measures for ourselves to make sure that we are not comparing ourselves to everybody else? And in return, not smelling our own flowers, or recognizing our own accomplishments, right? And what brings me to this is Trinidad Killers. he did an interview recently in Trinidad, talking about how, he feels away because, it's always the same 10 artists who, dominate when it comes to Trinidad Carnival, and how, they'll premiere their stuff in Trinidad, and then once Carnival is done, they'll leave and go tour all these other islands. They'll never come back until it's Trinidad Carnival again. And it's not fair to other artists who are, putting in all the time and work and effort, like himself, I'm sure is who he was referring to, that don't get half the recognition but are doing the same amount of work. And while I sympathize with him, I completely understand feeling like there are certain people who are always recognized. It doesn't matter what they do, they're always in the limelight, they're always getting the accolades and stuff like that. But I don't think it's fair to compare yourself to them, because one that we always see on social media, it's stop comparing your day one or your day 10 to somebody's day 130. And I think that's a lot of what is going on here. Like the names he was dropping, it just like Marshall, how many times is Marshall going to win? How many times are we going to see Lyrical and Voice and Patrice and Nyla? And I'm just like, sir, these are people who have been grinding. These are people who have been like, I think it's wild to mention Marshall, and to say then that because these same people are always winning and or always in the limelight, or their songs are always, generating all of this noise, that soca is dying. That is a wild statement. A wild statement, because that also then only centers Trinidad and Trinidadian soca. Every island has their own sound, their own type of soca. So to just say that because these certain Trinidadian artists are, they're griping you, or they make you feel a way that soca is dead. What about, there's a whole chain of islands in the Caribbean? What about Saint Thomas soca? What about Antigua soca? What about Grenada? You ever hear Grenada? So like that is it's wild to me to like center one island in the conversation of soca, a whole musical genre, and say that because we only have these certain artists in rotation all the time, that soca is dying. I completely understand him wanting to hear newer artists, or hoping that these artists will, train up newer artists to be on their level, or to, share in the same success, to continue growing the genre. But to say what he was saying, it could be just the way that it resonated with me. It might not have been what he was saying at all. But the way that it resonated with me was completely out of pocket. I think, and the funny thing is, I remember commenting on a social media page about what he said, and I was like, it's really funny to me that he mentioned all of these other artists, because I can name you millions of songs from all of these other artists, but I couldn't name any one of his songs. And that's no dig to him, because come to find out, I literally had to go to Apple Music and type in his name to see like I'm like, I can't name a song of yours. So I don't know if you really can compare yourself to these other people, because they put in the work to make sure that I know who they are. I couldn't tell you one of your songs, but I have a number of his songs on all of my playlists. So I'm just like, sir, like, are you kidding me right now? Like, you have some really good songs. And if you spent half the time, focusing on pushing those, or seeing where the gaps are when it comes to soca, what's working, what doesn't work, I may be able to name a couple of your songs, or we can have a more serious conversation. For me, it's but especially the artists that he mentioned, those artists, to me, I feel like they study what works, right? They will drop songs in Trinidad, for Carnival, and that makes sense. Like I don't understand his gripe with the whole dropping things for Trinidad Carnival and then touring. Literally, they're literally just touring throughout all of the different islands and then coming back to Trinidad to do it all over again because we know the world is watching when it comes to Trinidad Carnival. And everybody always says, like when things drop at Trinidad Carnival, you'll literally hear it for the rest of the year, all the way down to I remember, you know, going to Trinidad Carnival last year, hearing Come Home and Hard Fat and stuff like that, all the way down into October, Miami Carnival. They're still playing Come Home, Hard Fat. Like the songs run all year. And some can also say that's just by virtue of being like, one of the first carnivals of the year. I know there's also St. Kitts, but you know, of one of the two earlier carnivals of the year, it makes sense to drop them early at the top of the year and have them run for the whole year until you do it all over again. But to me, when it comes to these artists, I feel like you can see through their artistry that they take the time to study what's missing or what sound may pop for the next carnival, right? And we see that with songs like Come Home, right? I can't name another song that made me feel like how Come Home made me feel prior to that, right? Or not in recent history, I should say. And I feel like you can blame the pandemic for some of that as well, but I couldn't put my finger on it, right? Cool. They dropped that song. Nyla dropped that song with Skinny Fabulous. They tested that song, literally that whole carnival. It took off. I'm literally standing in a fet watching people cry as Come Home played. I had always been a hard Fett fan. I knew that song was gonna take Road March. I was a big fan of it, but I'm still watching people stand up in a fet, cry, big tears, big people cry, big tears. Um, Listening to that song, and I know that both Nyla and Skinny Fabulous, they understood that, they saw that, they saw the reception to that song, and they're like, okay, cool, they know that this works. So this year we also see a lot of people following that same like nostalgic, uh, groundswell, bringing emotion out of people type of formula when it comes to their songs. We see that with DNA. Nyla has another song that mimics, not necessarily the same, but mimics what Come Home did in terms of the reception. And it's doing well again. DNA is doing beautifully. That is my pick for Road March this year. Um, Even Carnival Contract by Bungie, right? Also has some of the some of the same elements that, you know, the Come Home formula is what I would call it has. And I think that these people truly sit down and study the music in that way. And I really wish that all soca artists would, you know, study soca in this way, because soca is a big deal. Like, just because the rest of the world has not caught on, it does not mean that it is not something transformative. I listen to soca 365, 24/7. There is no time that soca is not appropriate to me. I listen to soca in the gym. I listen to it in the morning on my way to work, when I'm coming home from work, when I'm cleaning. There's no inappropriate time for soca for me, right? Yeah, no, there's none. So I wish people took soca that seriously. And I find it funny, his comments, because even today, today, I'm filming this on Sunday. You'll see this on Wednesday, Valentine's Day. But today, Sunday, Farmer Nappy had to respond to him and say, like, hey, don't. He's literally saying exactly what I said. Comparison is the thief of joy. Don't worry about everybody else. Run your race. Focus on you. You are a great artist, and he is. I love his songs. I have his songs on my playlist. He's like, just keep going. And he even cited Unku from Burning Flames. Look at that. So you see that this all comes full circle. But yeah, it all came full circle, and Farmer Nappy had to remind him, like, when you advice he got from Uncle was like, when you stop, that's when everything stops. When you decide to throw your hands up and give up, that's when everything stops. Like, you can be right there on the precipice of your greatness. Your time could be right there around the corner, but because you stop, you will never know. And I think that's really powerful because come to find out, he has a song called Riot right now. I love this song. I listen to it in the gym all the time. It is mashing up Trinidad right now. And that is the point that I'm trying to make in comparing himself to all of these other artists. He has missed his own joy in realizing that his song is doing extremely well. And just because it might not be, Road March contender this year or what have you, that does not mean that you cannot go and be, a Road March contender next year. It does not mean that you cannot go and continue to make great music, right? You take the same formula that you had for Riot and do it again next year. People will already be looking out for you because they love Riot so much. And I'm sure it's something that we're going to hear all the way down until, Miami Carnival, St. Kitts Carnival, the top of the next year. So I just think that this is all a great reminder that we should all focus on running our own race, make sure that we stop and smell our own flowers, because that will be the motivation that keeps us pushing forward, because our time is usually right around the corner, but we never get to ascend to, our precipice or, our height, because we always stop short because we feel that others are doing better than we are. And we don't know how much work they're putting into it. We don't know how long they've been running their race, but we do know that they never stopped, which is why they're enjoying the success that they're enjoying. But yeah, those are all of my thoughts for right now. Thank you for tuning in again. New episodes are coming. We'll be live and direct from the podcast studio that I am building. Hopefully I can get some content about that too, because it's hard, y'all. I'm not gonna lie. It's hard to make a podcast. I don't know anything about technology. I don't know anything about the mics and stuff like that. I did one documentary and I'm using this camera with this little mic that I bought for that. It came out nice, but I was not the person editing. I did not, no. So yeah, look out for the new episodes and the new guests. We got some really cool guests coming up. And yeah, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tabanca.